for organizing this webinar, and thank you attendees for being present as well. It is really, really great to be able to come together on this special day of the Youth International Youth Day to just celebrate as young people what this means to us and for the future of the African continent. One of the things that you should know is that Youth Day was actually created in 1999 by the United Nations in order to celebrate the young people and to further encourage them and governments to include young people in the development of the world and what the world is doing. Suleiman, my computer is absolutely refusing to open my PowerPoint. I don't know if you can open it on your side. So one of the things that he has said is that as young people on the continent, we represent the majority of people, and we have the most youthful population of anywhere else in the world. But having a youthful population is also can be seen as a good thing, but a lot of people also see it as a bad thing. That if you do not engage the energies of young people, they tend to have so much energy, they can tend to use it in the wrong way. So how is it that you can continue to engage them and then have them feel as both contributors and beneficiaries of the development of this phenomenal continent of ours? Young people continue to suffer from numerous challenges as unemployment, poverty, low levels of civic engagement, which makes them easily manipulated by politicians. And moreover, as young people, we are not consciously actively engaged or wanting to find out more about how we can be engaged. It is said that studies done by the UNFPA that we have the lowest numbers in terms of voting, in terms of engaging in civil society, etc. How does that be? It's something we should question ourselves as young people, is that we are the majority of the population, yet we ourselves are not being engaged. And one of the things that speaks to this number is that, we're looking at the webinar and so many people signed up, but where are they, kind of thing. So this is another thing that consciously we want things to happen for us, we want things to get done, but then we sit back and wait for somebody else to do it, and then we get mad, and then we try and find our own maybe not so good ways to do things, if I can put it that way. So a question we need to ask ourselves, a second question we need to ask ourselves is that, are we necessarily sidelined from participating in politics, social, the economy, etc.? Or maybe it is us who sideline ourselves. Are we actually putting ourselves out there in order to participate? And that's one thing I always ask YALDA people all the time, is that, are you waiting for people to feed you, or are you going out there to plant, to grow things so you can feed yourself? And I think that is one of the things that we young people at YALDA strive to encourage you other young people to say, what is it that you are doing in order for you to be engaged, civilly engaged. So we are struggling with my presentation in terms of putting it up, but that's not a problem. I'm going to try and open it one
more time. Yeah, it
You've
is.
got it?
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, great. Yeah, okay. Sure. So awesome. So great. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways that youth can voice themselves or find their voice in terms of civil engagement, civic engagement. I mean, we've talked about, Suleiman talked about how socially it's political and it's economic. So mainly what I'm going to talk about is the political social engagement. How can that happen? Because obviously with the economic engagement, there's a lot of talk on entrepreneurship and what young people can do in terms of entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of talk around that. But there also needs to be policies and programs that can facilitate the environment for young people to be entrepreneurs or to engage, to be part of the civic engagement. So the first, next slide, please. So the first way that young people can be involved is with civic engagement. Next slide. Yes, is youth being involved through in government or parliament in policy making itself. So we have seen examples of this in various African countries, which one of the African countries that comes to mind that has done a lot in terms of really including young people in terms of decisions, parliamentary decisions and policy making, is the government of Uganda, where they reserve a few seats. I cannot remember correctly, but I think it's around 3 or 4 for young people under the age of 30. I think this is really, really important. You know how parliaments have maybe certain seats in parliament to be 30 to 50% women, etc. So this parliament in Uganda has to have at least 3 seats reserved for young people under the age of 30. And this is great because this is how the voices of youth are heard in parliament, and it's not somebody carrying the message of the youth, but it's the youth themselves voicing their opinion, and their needs to the other parliamentarians, and they, because also they better understand what they need as young people. The other example that comes to my mind when I look at African governments that have tried to really incorporate youth and make sure they participate is the government of Botswana. What the government has recently set up is national youth representatives. If I may ask whoever is on the background to please mute their microphone because there's a lot of background noise. But anyway, the government of Botswana has decided to put in youth representatives in every ministry in the country. So if you go to the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, there's a youth desk that is there to address youth issues. So they're making an effort to ensure that youth issues are brought to the forefront in every ministry. And when policies made, the youth are also there and their needs are incorporated. So that is another example. But the governments of the African governments, as you know, they ratified the African Youth Charter, which was drafted in 2006, and we adopted it in 2006, November 1st, which became celebrated as Africa Youth Day, which we are also going to celebrate in a couple of months as Africa Youth Day, as today is the International Youth Day. But an important thing to note is that the Africa Youth Charter serves as a document that guides African governments and guides us as youth with what it is that governments and we ourselves as young people should be doing to make sure that we are positively contributing to the development of our continent or to our lives and the lives of other people around us. So the African Youth Charter is a guide that has been developed by the youth for the youth. And what it does, it also serves to inform policy making at a national and regional level on the African continent. And a lot of this document has been used by African governments right now to formulate youth policies. And you have seen since 2006, my government, the government of Botswana, established the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. You have seen concerted effort by African governments to engage young people by the establishment of ministries of youth, or separating ministries of, because they used to have Ministry of Women, Youth, then separating those into 2 separate entities so that youth really get the voice and the time and commitment from government that they need. Lastly, in terms of youth involved in government, parliament, and policy making, is national youth councils. A lot of African countries have started setting up national youth councils. Some of them already were in existence, and again, guided by this document, this policy document called the African Youth Charter. And so you have seen that national youth councils serve as an engine to gather the feedback or the concerns and of the young people, and the national youth councils then are used as an avenue for the young people to state their grievances or talk about what it is they need as young people, how it is that our parliamentarians, our governments, ministries, you name it, can help us so we can be the best people we can be in society. So that's the first way, or the first, when I think of civic engagement, this is the first one that I see as the big elephant in the room, is as young people, are we participating in government? And if so, which avenues do we have to participate directly in government and government decision making and policy making? So at the end of when I've presented my 3 ways I see young people getting involved with civic engagement, then I will come wrap up and say what I see young people in different countries where maybe you do not have parliamentary seats or you don't have national youth councils, how I can see young people mobilizing in order to form these engines that enable us to be more engaged. So if we can go to the second slide. The second slide talks about youth involved in civil society and NGOs. So you find that since a lot of young people we cannot be voted in, and it's into power, one, because we don't vote, two, because we don't put ourselves out there in order to be representatives of other young people, we're not engaged in politics, etc. One of the other ways is we are socially involved through civil society and NGOs. So this is another engine that we can use in order to participate effectively in our in developing policy or tools that can help us. Because civil society, when we meet as civil society or when we form NGOs, you are able to mobilize young people to address a particular need or an issue. For example, an NGO that works with disabled youth in city areas might find that disabled youth are discriminated against in universities or high schools because there are no ramps for these disabled youth to go up in the schools, etc. These young people, or universities, for example. So these young people who have started this NGO, they are able to engage their parliamentarians, their government officials to say, hey, we might not be there, we're not directly in parliament or policy making, but this is an issue of concern because we, the youth, disabled youth, or our friends who are disabled cannot easily come to class because the fact there are no ramps available. And that, I've seen young people who go out on social media to address these issues, to make it known, to go on radio, talk shows, going on television, just to make it known out there and getting the support of the population in general. Because we forget that even the older generation are our parents, and they actually do care about our welfare. So, and they care about the welfare of their grandchildren, which will be our children. So they definitely do care, and making them aware of what we are facing, but also showing them the solutions of what it is that we have thought about in terms of how we're going to solve our own problems. It doesn't help us all the time to be crying wolf, but at the same time you're running around outside waiting for the wolf to catch you. But what are you doing to build your brick house so that the wolf doesn't catch you unawares? So that's another thing that we need to think about when we think about civil society, NGOs, is that there are problems out there, and we as young people are addressing those problems. in our own little way, but also making sure anybody who can listen, so that the impact is even greater, and it forces parliamentarians and other people in policy decision-making roles to actually listen to what the young people are saying. So that said, is that we've got two positive ways that we have seen that young people engage, and like I said, it's the through government, parliament, policy making, and then through civil society or NGOs. Now, unfortunately, as we are all aware as well, young people in Africa, we have a lot of energy, and sometimes we can tend to be very, very frustrated by the fact that we are not participating, we're not engaged, and that leads us down some wrong paths. Now, what do I mean by the wrong paths? This is what I would call the third way that young people get engaged. That is not necessarily the right way of getting engaged. Frustration, you don't have water, you don't have lights, government, parliamentarians have told you things are going to get done, they don't get done. Young people, we tend to get frustrated and we revolt, riots, uprisings, as you can see in the picture on the slide. And what does that happen? That leads to mistrust of young people. And people say to themselves, oh my goodness, these young people, they're just rebels. If nothing goes right, what they want to do now is burn down the whole city because they are upset. And this also leaves young people very, very vulnerable to what I would call militia groups. So what happens is that because these militia groups or these rebel soldiers, etc., know the frustrations of us young people, they can use us. And I think I mentioned it earlier in the beginning that we can be easily manipulated by politicians because of our own frustrations and not seeing anything happening around us, and become disengaged, but get re-engaged by the wrong parties with the wrong ideas and the wrong ways of doing things. What I'm talking about is people who will then recruit young people into their rebel armies. And you find that in Africa, if you look at any of these terrorist groups, you look at the rebel armies fighting in DRC, you name it, a lot of these armies are a lot of the soldiers in these armies, or recruits, let me say recruits because some of them aren't even soldiers, but the recruits are young people under the age of 30, and some of them are even children, and we're talking about child soldiers. So this is very, very, very scary, that there are people out there that are waiting for us to be very frustrated, and so that they can latch onto that frustration and use us as young people to launch uprisings, coup d'etats, and civil wars that do not necessarily benefit the society as a whole. In Africa, what we should be striving for all the time is to resolve our issues peacefully. And anytime somebody comes to us and tries to get us to resolve our issues in a way that creates violence, tension, death, we should say absolutely not. This is not how we are going to engage, and we should absolutely refuse. We are civilians and we want to preserve life. And unfortunately, on the African continent, too many of us are recruited into these groups that do not preserve life and do not seek solutions. And to add to that is that a lot of young people then are disappointed at the end when they're fighting for these groups, and these groups, let's say, come into power, and they do the exact same thing as the previous government did, if not worse. And so the young people are now jaded, and they wonder what happened, all this bloodshed for what? And there's absolutely no improvement in the condition of youth or in their own condition that they thought they were fighting for. So I urge you, my brothers and sisters and young people across the African continent, is that when we get engaged, when we think about our engagement, let's think about positive engagement, peaceful engagement. That will definitely take us very far. But where we think about things that lead to engagement, that leads to mistrust, bloodshed, and war, I think we should take a step back and think, this is not me. This is not what I'm going to do as a young person on the African continent. It is time for a change. It is time for an African to be different. We can't keep being the only continent that every year there's a coup d'etat. So think about that. And then to finish off, I think one of the main important things that I wanted to talk about when I finished off is that I wanted to just encourage young people to say to them that you really can be a leader, a young leader, and you can be engaged and have your voice heard. But it is up to you. And unfortunately, we expect our leaders to do something for us. But it doesn't work that way. Let's engage with them on a positive note and talk to them. Like I said, and I'll say it again, some of these people are our parents or our grandparents. So they do care about our well-being in general. So let's come to them with the respect and with respect, and just to talk to them and conversate with them in a way that they can hear us, and then to bring our concerns to them, but also not wait for somebody to do something for us. It is very, very important to continually find ways that we can improve our own situation. Because sometimes when somebody is not reacting or listening to you, and you say, okay, fine, I get you don't want to help me, that is fine. You go out, you find your own way around a certain issue. That person will sit back and be shocked and say, wow, you actually are able to do this. And then they might even open up more doors and say, oh wow, I didn't believe that this person can do this, but today they've shown me that they are able to. So let us make everybody believers of us African youth. Let us believe in ourselves, but let us also make other people believers of us, that they cannot do anything without us. So when I was at the African Union a few years ago when we were drafting the youth charter, I remember we had a SADC caucus. And in the SADC caucus, I remember some of the members saying, the slogan must be clear, nothing about us without us. And I think as African youth, we need to think about that statement. What does it mean when we say nothing about us without us? It means we should be the heartbeat of what is going on in our nations. We should know everything. We're the majority of the population. So everything that is happening out there is about us. And so we should be engaged. We should go out there and vote for our leaders. We should go out there and stand for elections and campaign. And most of all, as young people who are not campaigning for elections, etc., we must also be out there voting for our young people to get into these decision-making positions. So, from me, that's the presentation that I have for you in terms of just talking about youth and civic engagement on the African continent and what I have seen. I would love to take some questions. I don't know, Suleiman, what you want to do, but I do have questions.